Hi, I'm the Moonlit Page Turner. Grab your treat, grab your tea. Let's talk books. This month we traveled to Australia, and I have read several Australian authors before. When I was looking for books to read, I looked to see what was the best-selling book from an Australian author, and that led me to the Thorn Birds. And then I was given a suggestion by a friend, and that is The Trauma Cleaner, and that is a biography on Sandra Pankhurst, who just recently passed away. Before we get into this month's read, let's get into our treat. These are Lamingtons, and they're a well-known dessert in Australia. They are named after Lord Lamington, who was governor of Queensland from 1896 to 1902. They are basically little cakes that are covered in chocolate and coconut. Mine are actually two layers, and they have jam in between them. They remind me a little bit of Petit Fours. With the jam and the coconut and the chocolate. It is a more of the sweeter dessert, but it's really good. This was actually the one of the messiest things that I have made so far. The first book that we're going to talk about is The Trauma Cleaner by Sarah Krasnostein. And Sarah actually follows around our trauma cleaner, who is Sandra Pankhurst. And Sandra just passed away in 2021. She had some serious health issues towards the end of her life. Some of that was because of the events of her earlier life, and some of that was because of her job. And she is a quote unquote trauma cleaner. She helps hoarders and people who have been victims of crime clean up their homes. And it's something that is not fully established in Australia. So she is kind of almost one of a kind. And as we go through the book, we see some of Sandra's clientels. And the way that Sarah writes the book is that she tries to use those clients to tell us about who Sandra is and why she is the way she is. Sandra has kind of three main life events. We see towards the end of her life, she is a businesswoman who is very caring and helping of other people. The life that she lived before that, though, was very different. Sandra was a prostitute who lived in a brothel. She, at one point, had a girlfriend who was murdered. And trauma after trauma tends to keep happening to Sandra. The life before that, Sandra was actually Peter. Peter was adopted at a young age to a family who couldn't have their own kids. And then once they had Peter, they ended up having their own children, and Peter ended up being severely neglected, where he met a woman named Linda, and they got married and they had a couple kids of their own. So Sandra is a very complicated woman. I don't know if you're supposed to like her or not. From what I got from the book, I didn't like her. She was very caring to those that she helped, but she is a real person who has real faults. And she has issues kind of looking at her own past and seeing maybe things that she did wrong or people that she had hurt. She really does see her life as Sandra and not as the lives that she lived before. Those are just events that someone else lived. This book was super complicating to me to read as a reader, where I wasn't sure how I was supposed to feel. I'm glad that I learned about who Sandra was as a person, but I don't know if I would necessarily recommend this book. From one complicated story to another, let's talk about The Thorn Birds. This is probably the highest selling or most selling book out of Australia. It was written in 1977 by Colleen McCullough. And this picture right here is from the television miniseries that some of you may be familiar with. I was gonna watch it. I think you can watch it on Amazon, but take a look at how large this book is. This is definitely the largest read so far in the series. And then you'll see on my little tabs, all of the darker purples. These are all important events that happen to these characters: births, deaths, tragedies, marriages. This is a multi-generational drama. Our main character is this one right here. This is Maggie Cleary. who is 4 at the very beginning of the book. She ends up growing up and getting married and having her own children. When she is 4, her and her family live in New Zealand, and they are sheep shearers. When Maggie is 9, her family ends up moving to Australia. They move to her aunt's ranch, which is Drogheda, and that is an important home base for her and her family. She has a large family. So there are her parents, who are Fiona Fee and Patty, followed by their oldest son is Frank, and then Bob, Jack, Huey, Stuart. Then we see Maggie. Maggie is the only girl. Harold, Jim, and Patsy, excuse me. And Jim and Patsy ends up being born in Australia. When Maggie is 9, they move to Australia and she meets her aunt. She also meets a man whose name is Ralph de Briscart, and he is a Catholic priest. This is important because when Maggie meets Ralph, she is 9 and he is 28. And yes, this is a love story between the two of them. He denies himself for quite a bit. The aunt sees something really early on, and so she pulls something between Ralph when she is about to die, where he'll have to betray the family. It ends up not really being a betrayal, though. And this, though, will separate him from Maggie for quite a bit. Maggie is hopelessly in love with Ralph, which is really off-putting for me, this whole love story. She ends up meeting and marrying this man named Luke, who works at the sugar canes and is just a complete... Ugh. They end up having 2 kids together, and then she moves back to the ranch. This book is full of tragedy. So if you are looking for something that is more multi-generational, there is a lot of drama, there's a lot of stuff that happens. It never got boring. It was so sad at some points. What happens to Frank and what happens to Maggie's father and what happens to her brothers. Her brothers often live a life of isolation. And this also takes place during World War II. So we see kind of the involvement of Australia going into the war. And also a little bit of what happened with the worldwide event of the Great Depression. I can't say I didn't like this book. I was surprised. This book really surprised me with how much I enjoyed reading it. I thought Maggie's daughter, whose name is Justine, she was spicy, and I really appreciated her kind of attitude into how the world was changing compared to Fee and Maggie. So there were things that I really liked about this book. The whole relationship between Ralph and Maggie just creeped me out the entire time. But I see why so many people like this book, and it was actually really enthralling to see. So while I don't know if I would fully give it my stamp of approval, if this is a type of book that you're interested in, I would give you the warning of the relationship of Maggie and Ralph, but you might want to check it out. Hey, thanks for stopping by. Next month, we are traveling to Austria, and I have 2 shorter reads for us this time. If you are interested in what is coming up next, please visit us on Instagram or Goodreads. See you then.